on my lap. However, we are ready for the next speaker. So, Corch, are you ready to go? I'm going to take that as yes. Hello.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Hi. I can hear you. So I hope you don't mind, but I'm not going to use your bio to introduce you. I'm going to use, there was a post a couple of weeks ago you made that I think is quite funny. So I'm just going to read that out, which is, Corch is a loudmouth jerk that constantly sprays his antagonistic opinions around the internet. Now, I quite approve of that. That was your post about people wanting to work for you. And that's kind of why I included both you and Ryan, obviously, because you are a single person and just hired your first person. It's an interesting thing to see your difference here. So we won't piss around so much. We'll just let you get started.
Sure. Right. Well, yeah, thanks for having me. And thanks to Ryan for giving his perspective. For me, it's actually really interesting to hear someone else's journey, even though they're in a different space and doing different things with their business. There is actually a lot of similarities, and you're probably going to hear a lot of the same sorts of points covered here. So that, I think, is just a good validation of the advice that we both have to give and the lessons that you'll hopefully take away from this. So I'm here to talk about being a freelancer or an independent consultant if you want to be like a little bit more corporate about it. If you have tuned into this talk, I'm assuming that it's because you're interested in that sort of a thing. It does, on the surface, seem like quite appealing. You think, oh, I'm going to be sitting in cafes and sipping lattes and rubbing shoulders with other freelancers, and it's going to be this like fast-paced, really exciting lifestyle. And you get to be your own boss, and you don't have to wear a tie anymore and all of that sort of stuff. But I'm here to tell you that it's not really like that. And the story that I'm going to tell is probably going to be a little bit more, maybe more depressing than Ryan's, at least to begin with. But I will say that there are positives to it. We will end on a high note. So stay tuned. It's going to be an exciting ride. Before I get into my story, I want to everyone here to like stop and think about what they think it means to be a freelancer or to be an independent security consultant, because I feel like it's a really loaded term. It conjures up lots of different images. And we've all seen memes like this. I mean, I like this one. I made it myself because it actually quite accurately represents, my own experience. And I think the thing I really like to point out here is that the first 5 pictures, all of those look exciting or cool in some way, but like the reality is actually just a lot of Excel spreadsheets and Word documents. Even, I mean, I don't do a lot of penetration testing. I know probably most of the other people I know that do independent consulting are in the penetration testing space. But even those people, it's like, maybe 50% testing and then 50% writing reports and things like that. So there is still like that regular kind of, the job doesn't really change that much in terms of the actual work that you do. But I really just want you to understand that whatever you think about being an independent consultant, it's probably quite different to what the reality looks like. So we'll start back at the beginning of my journey as a freelancer. In 2015, I was still working in like a regular old consulting job. Been doing that job for about 6 years. I had about 15 years of experience in the various iterations of security, from IT security to information security and then cyber. And I had a very technical career. So I started out as a sysadmin basically, and I progressed through engineering up to consulting. I really hate corporate culture. I don't like wearing suits. I don't like wearing ties. I hate office politics. I hate the red tape of pointless processes and meetings, all that sort of stuff. But my attitude kind of like came through a lot, particularly when I was younger. I did develop a bit of a reputation for being hard to work with and burning bridges. And because of that, my career development was really kind of like stunted. And I say that, like it was kind of like a combination of my own actions, but also the person that I was working for was, in my opinion, the typical kind of Dunning-Kruger egomaniac, who thinks that they know everything and it's my way or the highway kind of thing. So I really wanted out of that environment, but I also didn't want to go back through the recruitment circus of like talking to recruiters and trying to get interviews. And I didn't have good experience with that when I was younger. So I'm like, you know what, stop this. I'm going to go out on my own. I back myself. I'm quite confident in my own abilities. I'm quite confident in my own capability, and I reckon I can do this. Just as good, if not better, than my boss at the time. I At the same time as I was having these thoughts, I had kind of like identified what I thought was an opportunity to work with small businesses, because most of the clients that I was working with at the time were bigger businesses, but they had all these like smaller businesses on the periphery, like electricians and their accountant and their lawyers and things like that. And they actually really struggled with cybersecurity. So I thought, look, there's an opportunity for me to go and get into that spot in the market. But as a highly technical person, I had zero experience in management, in leadership roles, didn't really know anything about business administration, and I definitely didn't know anything about sales. So, in hindsight, I was horribly unqualified to go out and launch my own business. I had what they talk about in business circles as an entrepreneurial seizure. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail soon, but it's basically when somebody who does technical work and is in a technical role, they start thinking, hey, I know how to do this work. I bet you I could run a business that does the same sort of work. So a year later, after I'd been in business for about 12 months, what did that look like? Well, it wasn't pretty. I had injected $20,000 in my own savings as like the startup capital of the business. Lasted about 6 months before that ran out. It took me 4 months to find any work at all. So that was 4 months of like getting up, going into my co-working space every day, reaching out to people on LinkedIn, talking to people, going to meetups. Like I was actually still working quite hard, but I wasn't really making any progress. The first job that I did find was actually just subcontracting for another company. So it was some people that I used to work with had also started their own company doing like networking stuff, and they were looking for help with security. So like they basically just brought me in as a subcontractor. Following that, it took me 8 months from start to finish before I landed my first direct client. Even that was just with a friend, and it was a very low budget job, so I didn't really make much money off it. But it was like an occasion for me, a momentous occasion to like be able to have finally landed my first client. But because it was a low budget small business, there wasn't like any follow up work from that. So I kind of did one job for them, and then that was it. So at the end of 12 months, I'd made a total of $30,000, which was about like a quarter of what I was making in my previous full-time salary. But after my business expenses, that was down to about 20K. Throughout the course of the year, I also spent $50,000 in my own personal savings, like just supporting myself with no income. I probably could have spent less if I had been a bit more frugal, but I mostly continued to live the same lifestyle that I had been living, and that was a luxury that I could sort of afford to do because I did have that money kind of put aside. But yeah, at the end of that year, I only had 3 customers, and I say that with inverted commas because 2 of them were just bigger service providers that I was subcontracting for. So they weren't people. It wasn't like I had that one customer that was a friend of mine where I was doing work directly for them. It was just other companies who they had extra work. They were just kind of like farming it out to me. So what went wrong? Well, lots of things, obviously. I didn't understand the market. I identified that small business market, but I didn't really understand them. It turned out that they didn't really have much appetite in 2016, for cybersecurity. They certainly didn't have budget to spend on it. And even when I was having conversations with them, it was hard for me to get them to understand what I was even selling, right? So the literacy was certainly not there. I didn't know who my competition was. I had kind of assumed that I would be competing with other consultancies, but it turned out that my competition was actually IT service providers because it's a small business market. Most of the cybersecurity is absorbed is sold by the people that are just managing their IT. So they're selling them antivirus. They've got like a managed Sophos firewall or whatever. Like that's cybersecurity for small businesses most of the time. I didn't validate any of my assumptions. So those assumptions that I made about small business, about who I was going to work for, the kinds of work I was going to be doing, I didn't actually go out and speak to anyone about that. I just kind of like had made these assumptions based on the experience that I'd had in my previous job, and thought that that would sort of translate to reality. And I also didn't really define what it was that I was doing. So I said that I was an independent cybersecurity consultant. But again, talking to small businesses, they don't know what that means. And if you go to them and say, "Hey, I can help you with security," they don't really know how to respond to that. And they are used to buying products that do specific things. So just kind of offering them a blanket cybersecurity service, they didn't really understand the value there, and I wasn't able to articulate it. I set my prices completely wrong. I didn't have good visibility of like what other consultancies were charging, and the information that I did have seemed like really high. So I set my prices a lot lower than that, and what that ended up doing is basically just devaluing my service and making my service seem like there might be something wrong with it. And then sort of the more practical stuff, I didn't know how to find customers. I didn't know how to sell. And that's like a really big part of like being a freelancer or being an independent consultant is you have to find work. It doesn't always just come to you. And not having any contacts was another really big one, because not having any contacts basically means you've got no leads. That's where all of your work will come from, sort of when you first start out. So if you were to summarize all of that, what you would really say is that I didn't know anything about running a business. And if you think back to like what Ryan was just saying about his experience, there are a lot of things that are involved in running a business that you don't really think about necessarily when you start out, and certainly if you don't have any experience in that area. So if you're like me and you're thinking about starting your own business, you're probably just an engineer or a consultant, penetration tester, but you just want to really do what you're already doing, but you want to do it on your own terms. When I talked about having an entrepreneurial seizure, that term actually comes from a book. It's called The E-Myth. It's actually like 40 something years old now, but if you're looking at starting your own business, I highly recommend that you read it. And what the E-Myth explains, and what I basically failed to realize, is that there is a lot more to running a business than just doing the work that the business does. And the fatal assumption, which is another concept from the book, is basically that if you know how to do the work, then you know how to run a business that does the work. And the reality is that there's actually completely different skill set involved. And also it takes a lot of time, because as a freelancer, you are the only person in the business. There isn't somebody that you can push the administration or the sales, the business development, the bookkeeping, all of that stuff off. Like, some of it you can outsource, but you probably also don't have a lot of money to spend on outsourcing. So you end up doing a lot of that stuff yourself. And in the end, you basically end up having to do a lot of stuff that is not the work, and you probably don't enjoy it. And you're probably also not very good at it. I know I certainly wasn't. The feast or famine dilemma is something that I encountered pretty early on. Once I started to land jobs, and it's basically this problem where if you're the one person in your business, you can be finding work or you can be delivering work, but it's very difficult to do both at the same time. And I think as a technical person, the finding work and the business administration and the business development stuff, that's like foreign. It's not comfortable ground for you. So when you have work on your plate, it's very easy to kind of like bury your face in it and just kind of like shut out all of those other responsibilities. You feel like you're being productive, you feel like you're getting stuff done, but actually, like, there are all these things that you're actually just kind of procrastinating that are equally as important as being able to deliver the work. Um, Another interesting discovery for me, or lesson, was that whatever your hourly rate is, you're not going to be able to bill 40 hours a week at that rate, because a lot of the work that you're doing is going to be that internal administration. It's going to be finding customers. It's going to be talking to your accountant, like things that you can't really charge your customers for. So my back of the envelope calculation was that you essentially need at least 20% of your time to do that non-billable stuff, which means that at best, you have 75% of your capacity to be able to deliver work. Getting the balance right between finding work and delivering work was one of the hardest things for me. And a lot of it is because I wasn't good at finding work. So when you're not good at something and you have something else to do, but you're good at it, like I said, you just kind of like focus on the things that you can get done, focus on the problems that you feel are more immediately solvable. But then, like, when that job finishes, if you're working on an engagement and you wrap it up, you send the deliverable to the client, you've got nothing on your plate next, then you just end up sitting around kind of staring at the walls. And it can be really disheartening to go from being really busy to like suddenly I've got nothing to do and I don't know what to do about it. I don't know how to go out and find more customers. I don't know how to generate more leads. And that I found certainly early on was like quite debilitating. And then when another job does come along, you're like, oh, good. And you go back and you bury your head in the work again. And like, so it kind of turns into this like vicious cycle where you're either like feasting on work or you're experiencing this famine where there's nothing to do. And when that goes on for a long period of time, I actually found that it can be like quite a soul crushing experience. So to be successful in the long term, you need to build what we call a pipeline, which is basically a pipeline of work. It means, in short, that like you have your next job lined up before the one that you're working on finishes. And ideally, you have several jobs lined up. But as an independent consultant, it is one of the hardest things to do because, like I said, you have limited time, limited capacity. If you're delivering work, it's very hard to also be out finding work. And particularly if you're on engagements where you're sort of charging at a day rate, it's hard to justify spending 30 minutes or an hour on like a sales call with another client when you're billing that day to another customer. So that often can mean that you end up working extra hours late at night, and you can, end up sort of getting burnt out that way. So to be sustainable, you ideally want to have like a stable of clients. And hopefully they engage with you proactively rather than you constantly having to kind of like chase them, because the chasing is super time consuming and it's not much fun. And you feel, or I felt very unproductive and very useless because I was not very good at it. You do end up being very dependent on sort of like the networking and the referrals that come from people that you work with or people that you know. And even to this day, like most of my business still comes in from referrals, people that I've built relationships with. So I really can't overstress the importance of that kind of interpersonal relationship building and personal branding, really, as an independent consultant. I talked a little bit about like working for bigger customers as a subcontractor, and early on that was the easiest thing for me to do. You kind of get sort of trapped in a little bit because you become dependent on them. A little bit like Ryan sort of said, you can become dependent on like the funding that comes from venture capital. If you have one big customer or two big customers and most of your work comes through them, then you can become dependent on the work that you get from them. And then there's a risk then that if they pull their business or they stop spending money, that like effectively they can shut you down overnight. Your revenue can dry up, and because you've been focusing on those bigger customers, all of your other relationships sort of wither on the vine, or you haven't had the opportunity to develop them. And so you again end up staring at the wall a bit and wondering what you're going to do next. The flip side of that is that the small businesses are a lot harder to get to spend money and to get them to like recommit. I very rarely did a job for a small business where they, sort of received my report and then they were like, okay, great. Like now let's immediately go on to fixing some of the things that you identified. Most often, whether it was budget or they were scared of what they read, they would sit on the report or they just give it to their IT service provider to fix. There was very little re-engagement there. I guess now just jumping back to that last point about the bigger companies is that if you're only working for a couple of bigger clients, you're not really working as an independent consultant. You're really just working as an expensive contractor. Segue, contracting versus consulting. What's the difference? I like to make the distinction because I think they're two very different things, but a lot of the time people kind of bandy the terms about sort of interchangeably. If you look at this slide here, you can see that there's maybe some things that people would point to say, well, consultants just do the same thing, but they charge more. Or, the engagements are shorter, contractor, you're in a job for 3 to 12 months, sometimes longer. Consulting gig is usually like a few days to a week, maybe a couple of weeks. Certainly in my experience, that's kind of like the length of engagement that you'll be doing. But I think that the real key in the difference is like, what's the nature of the work that you're doing? Consulting is more about, I guess, like a sort of a project focus where you have a fixed scope, outcomes that you have to achieve, deliverables that you have to provide to, and that sort of is a neat little package there in terms of something that the client will consume. Contracting is more like basically just being a bum on a seat. And I've done plenty of this in my time as well. Like they need a firewall engineer, or they need a cloud engineer, or they need a GRC consultant, somebody to come in and fill a gap that they have in internal resourcing for 3 months or 6 months or longer. And I think that if you're a contractor, like essentially you're just an employee, really. Yes, there are differences. You make more money, you don't get sick pay, but functionally you're really just serving the same role as an internal employee. I think if you're thinking about being an independent consultant, like think about whether to you that means you're going to be doing this sort of more entrepreneurial side of things, or you're going to go down the contracting route. It's two very different pathways in my experience, and I certainly have fallen back on contracting when consulting became sort of unviable. But it's kind of difficult to do both, as I said, because the contracting is very time consuming. You're basically a bum in a seat for 8 hours a day. You don't have the luxury of taking calls for business development, or if you have to spend 3 days on another client engagement, you can't just kind of like tell the contractor, the company that you're contracting for, sorry, I've got to do something else for 3 days. Which brings us to COVID. When COVID happened, I was going through a bit of a sort of a change in my business at the time anyway. But what basically happened when the lockdowns were announced is that all my business shut down overnight. Small business customers canceled everything, pulled all their spending, and the bigger clients, if they had projects that they were thinking of doing, that all just, was put on hold. There was a lot of work done by companies kind of scrambling to, get remote working up and running. But unfortunately, most of the work to do that in terms of the implementation tended to go to the IT service providers. Fun fact, I almost didn't get JobKeeper because my business didn't have employees, and JobKeeper was for businesses with employees. But thankfully, they did change the rules so that people who were small sole traders and self-employed could get that as well. But because I had no work to do, I pretty much spent most of the year playing Final Fantasy 14. I got really good at doing savage raids. And then eventually in 2022, I took a contract gig. And this is what I mean about falling back on contracting as sort of a more stable income source. And certainly when things got rough and finding consulting work was very hard, the stability and certainty of income that came from taking a contract gig, was very appealing. It was only supposed to be 3 months to start with. It ended up going for 18 months. And I eventually kind of had to sort of forcefully extract myself from that because it started to feel a lot like I was an employee, and they did try to hire me on a full-time basis. So it was kind of like I had to make the decision, like, do I want to keep doing this or do I want to go back to running my own business? I did want to go back to running my own business, but that also meant essentially starting from scratch. But the reason I put this slide up here is because I want to highlight that when things go horribly, horribly wrong, there is no one there to save you. If you get sick, you don't get sick pay. If you take holidays, you don't get holiday pay. If you can't work for some reason, then like you're not really entitled to any form of compensation. Sole traders aren't covered by work cover. So if you injure yourself on the job, then you're basically out of luck. You can try and get income protection insurance, but a lot of income protection insurance providers don't really work with sole traders or self-employed people. And if they do, there's all these extra conditions. The premiums are higher. And even things like superannuation, you have to make your own super contributions, and it's very easy to forget to do that. When you aren't paying yourself a salary, you don't have like a payroll, a regular pay run. You're just kind of like taking the profits out of the business. I think in the first 2 or 3 years that I ran my business, I didn't put any money into my super. And a lot of that was because I actually didn't have money spare to be able to do that. Ryan talked about the challenges of growth and how it can be very hard. And he talked about that sort of chicken and egg problem around, do you find work first and then hire, or do you hire so that you can deliver more work? This problem is exponentially more pronounced when you are an independent consultant. Because it's very difficult to build effectively a pipeline of work that can support 2 people when, to begin with, you've only got the capacity to deliver at most 75% of your own output. And again, like that client relationship piece, all of that sort of business development stuff, it's very time consuming. So if you are going to have 2 people, then you also have to count for the fact that you now have to do business development to find work for 2 people. I also, well, as Ian mentioned, I have just literally like last month hired my first employee. It's taken me 8 years since I started, and they're only doing 1 day a week. But for me, learning the difference between 0 and 1 employees has been huge. The things that you have to have in place that I didn't have to have in place when I was working just for myself, like payroll and HR management, I have to have documented policies and procedures now because my employee has to be able to refer to them. I had to get working cover insurance. And probably the biggest impact functionally is that I now have to manage someone, which is more time out of my day, more time out of delivery that I can't do. And the person who's doing work for me, they aren't doing billable work. So it's not even like the time that I'm losing to doing billable work is now going to someone else, as I am having to manage them. It is something that I effectively have chosen to absorb for the sake of trying to grow the business. But it's very challenging, and I had to be in a fairly secure place financially before I was willing to kind of take that risk. Jumping forward now to, I guess, like where I'm at. and what I'm sort of looking at. So I talked earlier about how I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know my market. I didn't know my clients. I have a lot of lessons that I've learned the hard way now. So since coming out of that long-term contract, I've pivoted a little bit. I'm refocusing my efforts on some specific services that I'm offering to clients that are more clearly defined in my mind. And I'm trying to be more picky about the clients that I work with. I learned that lesson earlier on, that like trying to target those really small businesses is too much effort for not enough payoff. So I've actually had to kind of like lift my sights a little bit to find people that are willing to invest in cybersecurity a bit more. I am focusing a bit more on partnerships, like working with other small businesses in other industry verticals like accounting, in law. Other professional services are really good because they have a lot of crossover there in terms of the work that they do, the clients that they have, and the needs that they have. I'm also trying to facilitate scalability. That basically means that I've now got this employee. I want them to be able to do some of the stuff that I have to do. That means that I have to have systems in place. They have to be documented. The processes have to be repeatable. So I'm now, for the first time ever, starting to write internal documentation and like track my work in Jira tickets and all that sort of stuff. And I'm also trying to move to a more stable revenue model where I'm kind of focusing on fixed price services delivered over a long-term commitment, rather than these like one-off jobs where I do a week here and then 6 months later I do another week, and it's very unpredictable. So that is all stuff that I've kind of like moved towards after failing miserably at trying to do things differently to begin with. So it's been a lot of negative stuff so far, but I did say that we would finish on a high note, and I just wanted to like talk about some of the good stuff about running my own business. And again, I think here you'll probably see a lot of echoes in what Ryan said earlier. It is a great opportunity to challenge your limits, and I personally have experienced phenomenal personal growth as a result of doing this. I've learned a lot of stuff that I would otherwise have had no reason or opportunity to learn. And that has made me a much more well-rounded individual, but also a much more valuable professional. You get to set your own hours, and you can work only as much as you want. So obviously there are some caveats there. You have to sort of align with the rest of the business world, and you have to work as much as you need to support yourself. But if you can make enough money in like 9 months to support yourself for the rest of the year, then you can take 3 months off, and as long as you plan for that. You can work from home, you can work on the beach, work from wherever you want, basically. You've got nothing tying you down. I certainly have found, and certainly since COVID, that is very little occasion to even have to go into a customer's office, because they don't have them anymore even. The small business instant asset write-off is a great little tax perk, but basically whenever you buy something in your business that is less than $25,000, it's instantly claimable as an expense. You don't have to do depreciation or anything anymore. Do talk to your accountant. My accountant handles all that stuff for me. But financially, I've found that there are a lot of sort of things that you can sort of claim on tax that as a person who works in someone else's business, you don't necessarily have that opportunity. You do get to meet lots of cool and interesting people. I've done a lot of traveling, a lot of networking. I go to conferences, I speak at conferences, and you do get to meet lots of cool, interesting people along the way. And like ironically, or however you want to say it, like you do get to be the master of your own destiny, whatever that means to you. For me, it meant having the freedom to make my own choices. And even though I am not necessarily making as much money as I used to when I was in a full-time consulting job, I am much happier with the life that I lead now. So just finishing up, a few key takeaways, and I hope that you will remember from the end of this talk. Going freelance does mean running your own business. It's not just a matter of continuing to do the technical work that you're doing. If you just want to keep doing the same sort of work that you're doing in your job, then being a freelancer is probably not for you. If you are thinking about the contracting versus consulting route, you're definitely, I would say, I wrote probably, but I would say definitely going to make more money contracting, just because the money is more constant. You know, every week that you're going to be getting a set amount, whereas consulting, it's a lot more up and down. I guess I did mention it earlier, but like my income as a consultant has never really recovered to the level that it was when I was in a full-time job. So, part of that is because I suck at business and being a consultant is hard. But I think that for anyone who, like me, is a really technical person, you'll probably find that there are some trade-offs to be made around sort of quality of life and that freedom that you get from being a freelancer versus the steady income and the financial stability and security that comes from having a full-time job. It is easier to start with a team than go it alone. Ryan talked a lot about his team, his partners along the way, and how he's really been able to they've leaned on each other when starting their own business. Having to do everything yourself is really hard. I didn't really have anyone in my life at the time that I was sort of willing to go into business with, but I sort of regret that now. It's really hard to go now from having built all this on my own to contemplate maybe bringing a partner in and giving away half of my business to someone when I feel like I've done all this hard work so far. So find partners to start with. If you just want to be like an independent consultant forever, like that's great. Like you can set out on your own. But if you ever have intentions to grow, I think you really do need to have a team with you to help you kind of build along the way. And also when you're finding that team, like try to find people with skills that complement your own. Don't just go out and find a bunch of other engineers or penetration testers or whatever. Like you need someone who can do sales. You need someone that can do business administration and management, right? So like try and find that mix of skills. Do start from a place of financial security. Like I said, in the first year, you're going to burn through a lot of your own money. And you're probably not going to make a lot of money. So you kind of have to be prepared to take that hit when you step out on your own. And lastly, do have a backup plan or some sort of exit strategy in case it doesn't work. And whether that is just to fall back on contracting or to go back and hit up your old boss for your old job back, you do need to make sure that you've got something to move on to, and that you have like a set criteria for like when is time to call time, because you can sort of, if you hang on for too long, things can get really bad. I have seen people that I know who've kind of like held onto their business for dear life and basically ended up in personal bankruptcy as a result. So be mindful, like I said, that there is no safety net. Everything does come back onto you, and so you do have to kind of like plan for the worst case scenario. So that's pretty much it. My contact details are down the bottom there, and I'll be in Discord if anyone wants to hit me up with any questions. Thanks for having me.
You're on mute. Come on.
It was me.
It was you.
I'm happy to pop the you're on mute cherry today. It was me. I have so many comments on your presentation and also Ryan's, but people couldn't see me, and I was even off camera on the backstage, but I was nodding a lot. Very, very relatable. One of the things I want to point out, though, having all of these incredible challenges and deciding whether you're going to, do products or services, are you going to go alone? Are you going to have a partner? It is really, really, really rewarding.
100%.
When things,
100%.
Yeah, when things are going well, even when things are not going so well, you can take that moment to step back and look at your strategy and am I doing the right thing? But when things are going really well, it is such a sense of achievement. Kind of having gone through the, going off and starting my own thing, bringing someone in as a partner. We joined another company, which happened just like, I kid you not, like 5 days. We officially joined 5 days after kind of the announcement of COVID. And it was like 5 days before the first lockdown. My life might have been very different if that had not happened at that time as well. I understand that, running your own business, especially a small business at that point in time, was extremely difficult.
There's a lot of luck that's involved too. Like,
Yeah, I got a great first customer, it basically funded me to set myself up, which was pretty amazing. Networking is always going to be a big part of this. But I do have heaps of comments, like, yes, I agree with this, maybe not with this. I don't know, if we seem to always have these talks at ComfyCon, so they're quite popular among our listeners. Is this something that we want to do an Ask Me Anything kind of thing in the future? Like maybe we can set up a YouTube Ask Me Anything, you, me, and Ryan after this, and do that Q&A for people that are looking to start their own business, because we kind of have come from similar but different perspectives and then different journeys, whereas my journey, I'm now in a, I'm not in a startup, but I'm in a small business, right? We have like 15 people, a mixture of services and products. But essentially I'm still doing a lot of my own, hunt and kill. I'm going out there and looking for work. And then I'm doing that work, and then I'm going back out looking for work, and then I'm doing that work. So, there's still some things there. But if people are interested, maybe post that in Discord if you want us to do a specific Ask Me Anything on running your own business in Australia, then definitely hit us up, and it's something that we can organize, because I think there's a lot to say. I think
I'd be in
both. Yeah, I think both of you hit like the nail on the head, where if you're doing the work that you like, choosing the customers you like, which is a big thing as well, then every job that you're doing is a success, because you're enjoying what you're doing, you're passionate about it, you feel good about what your job is and how you're benefiting the community and the organizations in Australia. So, if you are going to start a business, make sure it's something that you're really passionate about and that you want to do 24/7, because you will do it 24/7 for a little while. But you're going to want to love it. And if you love it, that will show, and then you will sell. So, but yeah, hit us up if you want us to do that to the audience. We can arrange that. I'm pretty sure. Well, Ryan already offered to spend some time. So if we could, schedule that in.
Alexi has as well. So I think
awesome.
I would, interesting.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Like have a little panel, Ask Me Anything. There's so many things to think about. Like you said, there's tax, there's super, payroll, policies. Even if you're a contractor to another business, say if you want to sign up to a managed service provider, one of the bigger ones for Dell, for example, you need to have a policy on like anti-slavery.
Yeah.
One person in Australia, we don't have slavery, but sure.
The administration stuff like takes your head off. Like you don't really have no concept. Even when people tell you like be prepared that this is going to be time consuming, like it still takes way more time than you think it's going to take.
Yeah, I definitely recommend. I had an accountant, a bookkeeper, and a lawyer.
Yeah.
Right, working for myself. Small business, but they were money well spent, tax deductible. But it meant that I had a bookkeeper that was making sure that I was submitting my BAS statements on time. Things like that, even your ASIC statements, your company statements. If you don't submit your ASIC statement on time, they are hell bent on charging you interest. So definitely, even if you are running a small one-person business, it can really be helpful having, obviously not full-time, but having people that are part-time being able to do that work for you, a bookkeeper once a month, for example.
Look, I'll
Favorite
stick
potato?
Yes, favorite potato.
My favorite potato.
product.
Yes,
Yeah,
your favorite.
maybe potato
Oh.
product.
Potato product.
Look, I'm a big fan of like the potato jewel, like mini hash brown kind of potato.
Yeah, I like potato gems. Yeah, nice.
Yes.
I'm gonna forward you that Instagram thing I sent to Ian. The mashed potato gem
Yeah.
baked with bacon and cream cheese and stuff.
It was delicious.
Yeah, I'm gonna pimp this. I should put it in the Discord.
Thank you very much, Corch. That was great. A lot of people have been saying in the rooms, like, it's great advice and also sharing their own experiences. So have a look there, and thank you again.
Thanks for having me.